I just want to give you a little bit of background about who we are at Skefto, and then I'll hand over to Alison just to share some background about Localise. So I'm just going to share my other screen. So essentially, Skefto is an Australian-owned company. In fact, we're based here in Melbourne, Victoria. And we have a really clear mission at Skefto, and that is to enhance maturity and create technological enablement in the areas of risk, safety, incident management, planning, and performance by combining our specialist consulting services with modern software. In my experience, I've had more than 20 years experience in senior risk roles, having the opportunity to work across local, state, and federal government departments, as well as private consulting. I'm a certified practicing risk manager with the RMIA and also a fellow of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management. In my spare time, I love everything that's international standards based, and I'm a nominated expert to the International Standards Organization, where I contribute to the writing and publication of ISO standards in the area of security and resilience. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Alison, and maybe you can share a little bit about Localise and yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Pete. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. So my name's Alison Dalziel, Director of Localise, and I'm an economist and a recovering public servant. So I actually started my career in local government and had a variety of roles from operations through to strategy and corporate planning. And then I spent a decade working for the New Zealand government in roles that were really at the interface between the government and local government, including advising the Prime Minister on local government during the period of implementing integrated planning and reporting there. So in 2009, I moved to Western Australia, right before integrated planning and reporting was introduced here, which has been fantastic. So Localise has been on that journey with WA local government from the get-go. Today, we work with many shires, towns and cities and their communities on their visions for the future and how to plan to get there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alison. So what we plan to cover in our session today is we'll look at a bit of the conversation around, well, what came first? Was it objectives or risk? We'll have a look at the key components of an effective strategy, why we should be linking our risks to our strategic objectives. Alison and I are going to share some myth busters, both in the strategy space and also in the risk world. And we'll have plenty of time for any questions that you might have at the end of our webinar today as well. So please hold your questions till the end, or otherwise, if you are thinking of things that you'd like to ask either Alison or myself, you can pop that into the chat. And Nick, who I haven't introduced yet, Nick and Costa, give us a wave, guys. Nick and Costa are also directors of Skefto as well. Nick's going to read out any questions that you do pop into the chat at the end of our session today. But first, I thought we might launch a short poll. We'd like to get your feedback around, does your organization have a clear link between their strategy and their strategic risks? So I'm going to launch a poll now, and I do encourage you to participate if you can. So just bear with me for one moment. So I'll just give everyone a moment or two to respond to the poll. Okay, let's have a look at some results. Another 10 seconds if you haven't got your response in. Wonderful. Okay, let's have a look at those results now. So you can see there that a small percentage of you have that clear link between objectives and risks. And they're documented and effectively managed. We've got around, a third of the room that says no, we don't have that link and they're not aligned. A third of you are saying partially, and quite a high percentage are saying we're unsure, which to me clearly shows that there is at times that disconnect between what happens in our strategy space and the risk space. And we'll certainly step through the importance of having a really close relationship between strategy and risk teams as well. Alison, anything for you that sort of stands out from the results of that poll?
Oh, actually, as I was looking at that, I was just comparing it with what I would say from our client's point of view, and actually I think it would probably be it would be a bit similar, and it's one of the areas that we do work with our clients on to try and get that integration happening. But yeah, I think that's probably pretty representative.
Great, thank you, and thanks everyone for participating. So let's take a look then. One of the questions that I get so often is, do we need a strategy or an objective to understand our risks? Well, ultimately, in my opinion, whether you're an organization, a team, or as an individual, we all want something to strive for. We're always looking to try to achieve something, which means that we need some sort of goal or an objective. And I'll talk about the definition of risk in a moment, but I guess really from my perspective, I think, yes, we do need to have a clearly articulated strategy or understand our objectives so we can then start to articulate and understand our risks. So Alison, I might start with you, and maybe we could have a look at some key elements of what a successful strategy would look like.
Sure. So the key elements of a successful strategy, and bearing in mind I'm particularly coming at this from a local government perspective, and then maybe people on the Zoom that come from other sectors that maybe would add some different things, but certainly at the top is that shared vision and what the sort of ultimate purpose is or ultimate outcome that the community and the local government are seeking. And often there'll be a mission and values kind of associated to that, quite closely connected. And then underneath that as well, what are the strategies or the ways that we're actually going to deliver on that vision? How are we going to marshal our resources to make that vision come to fruition? And ultimately, to do that, it's a real balancing act. So balancing aspirations with affordability is the absolute engine room of your strategy, and that requires prioritization. And you can't prioritize without realism. Like, you need to have the actual, what so of your resource constraints, what the the capacity of the organization, and those real choices of going this way or that way, and ultimately clear objectives that are actually linked through to delivery. And without that, it really does often become a wish list or pie in the sky. So I would say that the bottom line is that flow through to clear objectives linked through to delivery.
Alison, if I can ask a question, particularly we see this in local government. It's heavily regulated now around that integrated planning approach. So having that very clear community vision is now a requirement for local governments, both, I know, certainly Victoria and Western Australia. And then from that, the establishment of a strategic plan or that council plan. In your experience, have you seen that approach undertaken by a lot of different organisations outside of local government, where they have had a very clear vision and mission, and then articulated that through a well-defined strategy?
Yes, definitely. The other group that we work with is in the not-for-profit sector. So I've got less experience in the private sector, but in the not-for-profit sector, very, very similar. It's really interesting because usually a not-for-profit organization is really focused on a particular kind of subset of of things in the area that they're working in. The thing about local government that's really different is the breadth. I mean, local government is, I think, the broadest type of organisation that you can get. It's like, a lot of those services could be delivered as an organisation in its own right, and you put them all together, they're all mashed together in a local government organisation. It's got that incredible breadth and depth of impact on communities, and that I would see as a really critical difference between challenges of strategic and corporate planning and local government versus, for example, the not-for-profit sector, and I would dare to suggest in most cases also the private sector.
Wonderful, thank you. And that's really leads into that conversation now around the importance of linking our risks to those strategic objectives that we're ultimately, that our whether it's our council or our board and our executive have committed to take us to a certain point in the future of what we want our organisation to look like, and particularly in terms of what we're delivering on behalf of our clients or our community. Is really important that we understand some of those uncertainties to achieving those objectives, which sort of leads me to, sorry, I've got a fault in my, which leads me to really looking at the importance of linking risk to objectives. And if we look at the international standard for risk management, and its definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And I'll sort of unpack that for you a little bit in a moment. But when we think about understanding the context in which we're looking at the lens through risk, is that it will be different depending on whether you're looking at strategic risks at a project level or even your own operations. So in a strategic context, we really want our councils or our boards and executives to consider risk as part of that strategy development. And in my experience, I've seen organizations invest a lot of time and money and are really great at defining and documenting that 3-4 year strategy, and then wonder why, when they're in year 2 of execution, why are we failing? Why aren't we achieving the objectives we set out to achieve? And then I reflect and ask some questions around, well, did they actually assess those risks at a strategic level? Or more so, did they even engage the risk team as part of the development of the strategy? And, I often come to the conclusion of, well, I don't think they did. So many organizations, whether it's a public sector organization or private, we tend to retrofit our risk to our strategy or plan. And which is interesting because it's already gone through multiple reviews and approvals. And many are not considering the effect of uncertainty on those objectives while determining what those strategic objectives should be. So again, thinking about that international standard definition of risk. So it's defined as the effect of uncertainty on objective, and that can be positive or negative, or both, and can address, create, or result in opportunities and threats. Kind of confusing, isn't it, when you think about it? So this is what the international standard is telling us is the definition of risk. So it is no wonder when we bring together people from diverse backgrounds and experiences, when we start to talk about risk at that strategic level, they're all going, I'm not quite sure. Or are too afraid to actually put their hand up and say, well, can we get some clarity around what is the context in which we're talking about risk today? When I work with executives and boards, I actually do almost a risk 101 at the beginning of each one of those engagements to say, well, look, today when we talk about risk, we're talking about what is that uncertainty on you achieving your objectives. And today, because we're talking about strategic objectives, it's within that context. When we think about opportunity, opportunity is an outcome. So if you think about, if we manage risk effectively, then we can produce new opportunities for our organization, which means we can divert resources elsewhere, or we can start to explore other objectives that we may wish to pursue as an organization too. So is there a benefit in investing in risk management in our organizations? Well, of course there is. And I think it's important that when we have that investment in risk management and that alignment between risk and strategy, then we can identify some, really positive outcomes for an organization. And some of those outcomes really could be from having clear accountability across the organization. It increases the confidence of our decision makers that we are better placed to achieve those strategic objectives. It enables us to take on more risk when we need to. So that's, it's okay to take risk. And in fact, we really encourage organizations to take on risk where they can. And taking risks will help you to ultimately achieve those objectives. It enables us to be more innovative. So when I think about risk and innovation, they're almost a yin and yang of each other. So we need to take risks to be innovative, but at the same time, by being more innovative, then we can be creating more risk. It helps to improve our decision making. It reduces that uncertainty across the organization, creates opportunities, and finally, it will help you to enhance your organizational resilience. And in fact, when we think about organizational resilience, what underpins a resilient organization is its ability to effectively manage risk. Now, as I mentioned, I've worked in senior risk roles for more than 20 years, and I still see even now that there is a disconnect between strategy and risk. I've even worked in organizations. I've come in to sort of help improve their approach to risk management. And in some of those, the risk and strategy teams had never met each other, had never had a conversation about the impacts of risk on those strategic objectives. And to me, I still find that incredibly concerning, and I still see it today. So it's important that we have a really strong connection between our risk and strategy teams. When you're developing your strategy, integrate the risk team as part of that strategy development. They certainly are not there to say, no, let's not pursue this actual objective. They're really there to help us to determine, can we actually take more risk in the pursuit of this objective? Is it the right objective that we should be pursuing, or do we need to look at alternative options? Now, for some of our risk purists here online with us today, you've heard me use the term strategic risk. You might argue that, well, there's no standardized definition of strategic risk, and I'd say that you are 100% correct. There's not. But if you were to Google strategic risk, you would get over 890 million results. So strategic risk, although it's not a standardized definition, it's really become part of our risk management vernacular now. So, we'll hear that term used quite widely across your organizations. But, ultimately, let's face it, a risk is a risk is a risk. The only thing that really changes is the context in which we assess that risk in. So when we're having those conversations with our councils, our boards, and our executives, we want to make sure that we are contextualizing that at a strategic level. And ultimately for your organizations, that when you are looking at those strategic risks, that you are asking yourselves some questions. So how likely is the risk event to occur? How effective are our existing controls? If the event did occur, what would be the consequences for the people, the places, and the systems in our care? And if you ask some of these questions, as you're determining your strategic objectives, then you are more likely to increase the chances of achieving that future desired state that the board and executive have articulated in that 3 to 4 year strategy. So with that, we did promise that we would share some Mythbusters with you. And Alison, I might go to you first, and I'd love to hear your and get an understanding of some of your Mythbusters around the strategy space.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to focus on one, actually. Perhaps the biggest strategy myth that I see is that, like local governments, they will often work with their communities to create plan after plan. So there'll be a youth plan, a recreation plan, a this plan or that plan. In some cases, they can end up with a plethora of plans, but there's little or nothing in the plans that are funded. And you don't actually know what in those plans is going to be implemented and what isn't. But then they'll create their strategic and corporate plans that say, implement X plan and Y strategy and Z plan. And so you end up with strategic and corporate plans that purport to be a plan, but actually I would defy anyone within that organisation or in that community to know what was actually going to be done, because there's so much in those plans that you couldn't possibly be implementing at all. And in some cases, there is very little, if anything, in the plans that are actually resourced. So, and I think this is something that the revisions to the integrated planning and reporting in Western Australia is possibly grappling with. I won't say any more about that because I noticed Amy's here and she could say a lot more about that than me. But I do think that this is something that hopefully the new regime will help to bring some kind of reality to the strategic planning and local government, and linking that through to services in a way that actually shows what is actually being delivered. Because what's happening now is effectively a recipe for business as usual with icing on top. And it is then becomes subject to the day-to-day prioritisation of overworked managers and staff who know they can never get to the top of the hill, or even what the top of the hill even is. And this really takes us full circle to the beginning. Those clear objectives linked to delivery is essential to create a plan where you can actually have that degree of clarity and then be able to incorporate your proper risk management into that strategic process.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. And I think you're right. I think it's really, we need to start out with that clear, what are we trying to achieve? What is our clear purpose? And I think, again, coming back to, we articulate all these different strategies and then go to management and say, okay, execute, go for it. But having the right capacity, capability, and resources, including financial resources, to actually execute on what it has been determined by, particularly whether it's a council or a board. So yeah, thank you for that. I've just got a couple from a risk perspective. It might be a little bit controversial, but I'm happy for people to challenge me on what I'm about to say. But a few things that really stand out for me, particularly around risk, is that, we hear these terms of cyber risk, climate change risk, reputation risk. We tend to attach risk to everything. Well, today I'm going to, in my opinion, there's no such thing as cyber risk. Cyber is, or a cyber attack or a cyber threat is really a cause to a risk. Reputation risk doesn't exist. Reputation damage is a consequence. So it happens after a risk event has occurred. And really around climate change, depending on the context in which you operate, I know climate change experts will talk about physical risk, transition risk. Essentially, in an enterprise context, we want to consider those climate change type causes and consequences that could impact on our existing risks that we have identified and are managing. If you're looking at your risks and you're reviewing your risk registers and you see a lot of things that start with ineffective, inadequate, the failure of, generally, I'm going to tell you, they're not a risk. You're probably managing a whole lot of causes. And again, when you look at financial loss, compliance breaches, or damage to reputation, again, they're leading you towards those consequences. And the reason I highlight that is so it prompts you to think about, are we managing the right risks? And again, linking that back to where we started at the beginning, having those clear objectives. What is the effect of uncertainty on those objectives leads us to identifying a risk. And ultimately, if the risks that you've identified aren't reducing uncertainty, aren't enabling better decision-making, and don't assist you in achieving your objectives, then maybe you're not managing the right risks. So with that, just remember, you want to ensure that you have clear alignment of your risk to your strategic objectives, as it will increase the likelihood of success. It will help you to reduce uncertainty within your organizations. It will enhance your organizational resilience. It creates opportunities to pursue other objectives, or, can we take on more risk in other areas? It will help you to promote innovation in your organizations and ultimately improve better outcomes for you, your teams, your executive, and your board or your council. So with that, thank you very much for dialing in and tuning into our webinar this afternoon or this morning. got a QR code up there on the screen. If you want to know more, feel free to scan that in and just let us know what you'd like to know more about. So we can reach out from Localise or Skefto to provide you further information in the space of strategy and risk. I'll pause there and happy to open up the floor to any questions from those of you online. So whether you pop that into chat or feel free to use the raise hand function under the reactions tab, and we'll jump into you for some questions.